Anyone who believes in indefinite growth on a physically finite planet is either mad or an economist.
We don't want to focus politics on a notion that involves the rejection of principles around which a large majority of our fellow citizens organize their lives.
We are not as endlessly manipulable and as predictable as you would think.
From our perspective, we're incredibly proud of being associated with RSA Animate. It's a great way to communicate the RSA and its brand and its work around the world. We see making ideas accessible to people as part of our core charitable mission. So sometimes Animate can feel like it's a kind of decorative thing, and you know, the RSA is doing all its kind of very virtuous work in tackling drugs and alcohol abuse and improving school standards, but we see Animate as being absolutely core to what we do. It's not decorative at all, it's absolutely central to our charitable mission of making ideas accessible and exciting for people. Delighted now to turn to you first, Richard, and particularly for you to share with us the experiment that you undertook using Andrew's work.
Absolutely, thank you. At some point, somebody sent me a link to one of your videos. And I looked at it and thought, well, this feels very different. As an academic, I'm used to watching talking head talks, essentially. We have the speaker talking at the audience. I said what I'm really interested in is not so much whether the videos engage, because it seems to me that it's fairly obvious that they do, but also the kind of depth of learning, not just the number of eyes watching the animation, but what is going in from the animation, because essentially communication is about taking information in the speaker's head and transferring it to other people's heads. And we kicked around some ideas, and I said, let's do an online experiment, and we will test that notion. We created 2 videos, especially for the experiment. The first one features my good self talking about a psychological principle called the as-if principle. So basically, I just sort of gave the sort of talking head interview that I would do if I was being interviewed about it. Then I just took the audio, the soundtrack of that, and sent that to Andrew. And he produced one of the animations which you're now very familiar with in that style. And we asked people, how entertaining did you find them? How informative? Would you share them with other people? And so on. But what I was really interested in was that transfer of knowledge. So after watching the video, they went to another part of the website, and there they had some surprise memory questions. So it's a fairly hard and fast test of this idea of just how much information do you take from these 2 different formats. So we had around about 1,000 people take part in our experiment. And I was quite astounded at the results. Yes, people found the animation far more entertaining, no surprise there, and they're much, much more likely to share it with others. But looking at the answers to the memory questions, that's where you see the really big effects. 70% of people remembered that very, very vital piece of information when they're just listening to me. You take the same soundtrack, you animate it, and that goes up to 92%. So you're seeing a huge increase there, simply because people are, I think, more engaged in the process. We know that in order to remember something, you need to attend to it in the first place. And attention is really difficult psychologically. It's a very slippery concept. And so if you haven't put people's attention, you're not going to get the information in. And I think what the animations do is hold that attention. They hold it in an incredibly engaging way, and that means the information simply goes in. So across our various memory questions, we saw a 15% rise in recall. This is immediately afterwards, but a 15% rise in recall. And that is far from trivial. Anyone involved in educational research will know that is absolutely massive. Normally you have to work incredibly hard to get maybe 5, maybe 10% increase in any kind of behavioural measure like that. And simply by animation, you're seeing a 15% there. It shows there is something huge going on here, and I could think of a million other experiments we could do to try and get at exactly what that thing is. I think it is vital that we try and understand how this all works, because we're seeing a huge shift to online learning, online education now. That's where the action is. So we need to understand how people engage with that. You're seeing a very big increase, not only in enjoyment, entertainment, and all of that, but in knowledge transfer, and that's what's absolutely key. So that's what the experiment was about, and that's why I'm very excited about the results.
So, Andrew, give us an insight into the black box. We send you some video. What comes out is an amazing product which goes viral and engages people and fascinates people. What's happening inside that creative black box?
And what happens is I didn't always used to receive a transcript, but we used to get the audio. And I commute to work in my little smart car, driving down country lanes, and I just have it on the MP3 player, and I just listen and listen and listen and listen and listen and listen and listen about possibly 100 times to just the audio. And that's before I start drawing anything. And what happens then is little bubbles of images sort of force themselves into my brain. And that's quite interesting, because I sometimes have to pull the car over, just make some notes and get some little doodles down. But I don't tend to draw anything until I've listened to it about 50 times. So, and then I research. I do a lot of research into the content. I didn't always used to. I mean, interestingly, it took a Ernst & Young accounting firm to make me truly creative. I went to work for them. Would you believe? Yeah, it sounds odd, but I went to art college. I studied painting, fine art, did lots of painting, and they got together loads of creative people, artists, musicians, architects, writers, etc., to crack big problems, to be part of a team. And scribing, the video scribing is part of that, was part of their solution. And that involved just standing in a room with 250 people who are cracking a big business problem, supply chain or something like that. And you stand at the side of the room listening to the content. And that was the training of where this visual translation comes in. You're listening to real-time business conversations and having to draw live. And that's where the kind of quickness of drawing came in. And I don't know if anyone has gone back and watched any of the early animates. I actually used to draw pretty much them in real time. And as they've gone on, I've started to realise, I don't have to do that, do I? I can actually take my time and consider these things. And that's where the research has come in the latter ones. I tend to do a lot of research and read books that are mentioned in the talks, and I like learning. Part of the process is me getting to grips with the content so that I can understand it, so that I can tell the story. So it's pretty much going back to school for me.
It's one of the things I really admire about your work is that you do background reading. You don't just read that lecture, you read around the area. You feel it's important to have expertise in that area. And that kind of mixture of creativity and kind of almost academic research insight, that's quite unusual. I mean, don't get me wrong, a lot of artists are very clever people, but we've had lots of debates with artists here about issues, and they're better on the art than the issues, generally speaking, I have to say. There'll be artists in the room who are going to punch me on the way out now, but given your background, do you think that is quite an unusual mix?
I think it was being exposed to the environment that Ernst & Young threw me in, and it was business conversations, and they were throwing in information, complexity science and chaos theory and all that kind of stuff. And being exposed to that sort of stuff was surprising to me, because I thought at art college I was very creative, and I wasn't until I went into a business arena. And I think the important part for me, and I think Manuel Lima talks about it in one of the last animates, is that we need to be a bit more networked in our thinking and grab things from all sorts of areas and disciplines in order to be, I suppose, knowledgeable. So I find it reassuring to research stuff that I don't know in order to just draw, to be able to draw it. So just, what does that look like? How's that connected to that? And what's going on there? I think it's important that you do that.
So, after being disparaging about the arts community, I know I'm disparaging about the British academic community, which is it doesn't strike me that necessarily they take presentation that seriously. Do you think that, when you talk to colleagues and stuff about this, does a recognition that what matters about an idea is not simply the content of that idea, but also the way in which you express it and put it across and symbolise it, do you think that's taken sufficiently seriously?
I think there is this notion in academia, certainly old school academia, which is that you've got the knowledge, you stand on stage and you impart your knowledge, and it's up to the audience to follow you and to get the things. It's not up to you to communicate, it's up to you to simply speak at your audience. And it's very old school. I think that the new way of academics is far more about engagement. And of course now they've got much larger audiences than ever before because of online platforms, and people are starting to really care about that act of communication. Communication, as I say, is getting an idea from here into somebody else's head, and if you fail to do that, you fail. So anything which helps you is great. And it seems to be another factor here, which we might get into, is that sort of 100 years of psychology tells us pretty much that you do anything better when you're in a good mood. Pretty much. That's except being in a bad mood. You do that worse when you're in a good mood. But anything else, creativity, productivity, learning, good mood. Which is why it breaks my heart sometimes when you see school sort of classrooms or lecture theatres where everyone's in an appalling mood. Everyone's sitting there bored and just sort of in a terrible mood. And what's interesting about the animations, I think, one thing it does is it makes me laugh. It's like, oh, that's funny. And it puts me in a good mood. And that may well be exactly what's going on here. The animations, the skill there, part of it, is you're just making people go, oh, this is fun. Suddenly it's not so much work. And that not only makes them have a better time, more importantly, it means the information is just going in. And that to me could be a key factor here.
Humour's a really big part of it. And you're in Folkestone. There's a little bit of seaside postcard humour sometimes dropped in. It's quite English, the humour, it seems to me. I mean, many of the speakers are from around the world, but there's this kind of bit of English, slightly subversive humour playing through it. Was that
early animates were pretty much about conveying information, and they're very much like being an Egyptian scribe. You're being employed by the pharaoh to record stuff. Thankfully, what's the collaboration with the RSA has helped me to do is reconnect with being an artist again. And so part of that is expressing sort of all the stuff bubbling away in my brain, some of which is humour. And I think that I tend to use a lot of humour and cultural reference points to anchor stuff with a new audience, or an audience that might not be, who wouldn't immediately think, oh, I'm going to go and listen to a scholarly lecture. I've always thought there's a really interesting balance between sort of low cultures and high cultures, and I think artists have done that throughout time and made caricature and Rollinson and artists like that. They've used humour, graffiti is another thing, and I try and touch on that and try and explore those themes within the work so that it includes people that might not be wouldn't be the first port of call for what they want to watch. We've had comments on YouTube about I'm 13 and I've just watched this is great and I've learned something and this is better than going to school. Things like that are really exciting for me when you hear that and the feedback from young people. And I think part of the humour and part of using those cultural reference points it sort of includes people.
I have forgiven you now for the fact that the animate you did of my animate, the word thesis becomes associated with feces, as in dog's feces, but it works. I would never have thought of it beforehand, but it works. Now, do you think there's a danger in this popularisation of ideas, that in the end there are some ideas which are more amenable to being drawn? I mean, I was trained as a sociologist where it's on the one hand this, the other hand that, there's tensions and contradictions and problems and theories and, is there a danger that there's a kind of tyranny of ideas which Andrew can turn into stuff, and that in the end we lose all patience entirely with stuff which is almost impossible to do anything other than think very hard about?
Well, I think that telling people that there's a complexity to this, there's several ways of looking at it, there's probably not one answer, there's several answers, we're going to slowly get to that, we've been wrong in the past, all of that. I think that's great. That's what academia is about. Science is about uncertainty. We don't have the answers. Certainly the answers we think we've got at the moment were different to the ones we had 100 years ago. There will be progress and so on. So I think what I could see is you could take a complex issue and have two or many perspectives on it, all of which could be animated. I think that there is a worry that, yes, we just oversimplify, we dumb down. We should never do that. But there is also these ideas, often that their roots are actually powerful and simple once you distill it down, and we can get that concept across. But I'm all for reflecting the complexity of any issue and not dumbing down.
We're going to Richard's point there about the complex issues. I mean,
I was going to ask you, what was the toughest challenge we've given you?
I was going to say the Ian McGilchrist talk was quite hard because I remember...
That's left brain, right brain.
Left brain, right brain, the master and emissary. Yep. Because you're talking about two hemispheres of the brain that are linked by the corpus callosum. See, this is how I learn stuff. I think Ian's feedback initially for us was, I don't want it to be, you know, this part of the brain is this and this part of the brain is that. I want them. It's got to be the merging of these things, and it was that treading those lines was quite difficult in animation because you have to, in animation you've got to draw one thing, and then people think, oh, it's that thing, and then you have to somehow flip it and be quite tricksy with it and massage the images a little bit to make them ambiguous, and that was quite tricky, I think, that talk. But I like it. It was, interestingly, one of the talks that got a lot of negative feedback initially, but now it's kind of people... I think
you have to watch it 5 times. That's the
yeah, exactly. It's just dense, and I read the book, and my head was bleeding, and you know, it was hard work.
What is the brief you'd love to come knocking on your door? You know, complete works of Shakespeare, please, Andrew, or War and Peace, or Freud, or Darwin, or...
I'm interested in exploring a longer form, maybe a series that have all got links. So with an anime, you've got 10 minutes to explore these random areas of information. But with a series, I think you could build over time some really interesting stuff.
The anime box set.
That's right.
But what would you want that box set to be about? You mentioned Shakespeare to me before.
Shakespeare, I'm interested in doing Karl Marx's Capital as an anime, which kind of makes my head burst as well. But
and the tyranny of narrative, you know, it's like my tyranny of humour idea, which is that narratives are really powerful. So is there a danger that everything gets turned into a narrative, even if it's not really a narrative, if you know what I mean?
But everything is a narrative, isn't it?
Well, that's an interesting question, isn't it? I mean, I think we just have to finish there, don't we, really, with everything is a narrative. Discuss.
I think so. I think everything's a narrative. You know, that jug has a character. You know, you can tell a story about anything. You know.
These are 2 really powerful points we've heard tonight from Richard. That in the end, every complex idea can be broken down into something which you can make vivid and which can be simple, and the idea that everything's a narrative. This is a fantastic conversation. Thank you very much.